distributor with DojoLIVE. We are experimenting with a new format, a new show this week, and we're hoping to have a lot of fun with it, and we would like you to participate. So what's the recap show? The recap show is essentially a recap of last week's show. Last week we had Roger Maddox, who's the co-founder and chief creative officer of Ludolo, and we were talking about play and how the future of work depends on it. So the hosts of this show wanted to share some opinion and thought and anecdotes of what we thought of the show and what we think is relevant to the culture that we have experienced for the past 12 years. And so I want to introduce the rest of the cast here, and let's get this thing going. Please introduce yourself and bear with us as we experiment with this new format this week. We'll get it right, I promise you. Kim?
Yeah, thank you, Tulio. So my name is Kim Landis. Here at Nearsoft, I work in the area of internal communications. That means a lot of things. And I've been involved here at DojoLIVE for, gosh, almost since I joined Nearsoft 4 years ago. So I think about 3.5 years now, thanks to Carlos Ponce and his idea behind what we do. So Carlos, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. This is Carlos Ponce. I'm sorry. This is Carlos Ponce, and I'm part of the sales and marketing teams, and I also co-producer and creator of the show. I really look forward to this experiment that we're doing here with the recap show, which was Tulu's idea. So thank you, Tulu, for that. And thank you, everyone.
And let's introduce Matt, who's the man responsible for why we're all here.
The reason why we have jobs.
In the first place, yeah.
Started this whole thing, started all this trouble 13 years ago. Matt, please introduce yourself. It's great to have you.
So my name is Matt Perez. I'm a co-founder of the company that we started back in 2007. And I've done everything at one point or another, but mostly I've been on the sales side of things and the strategy. And that's it. There's not much to it. The rest of it has been how the company has grown and everything else has been very much in the hands of the people who work in it. So that's the amazing thing. It's been easy, if you will.
So I think I'm excited to have Matt on the show here because he and I are actually co-founders of this organization called Radicals, which is a movement to help companies and people realize there's another way to lead that doesn't require controls and doesn't require, people feeling like they're assets, machines, or resources, or cogs in the wheel. And much of what we do on DojoLIVE talks to culture, specifically about how to be change agents, how to create more inclusion, how to create more trust amongst employees, amongst customers. And in last week's show, I was really impressed with the conversation we had with Roger because he talked about how to use play in order to enhance and expand emotional intelligence amongst employees. I was impressed to hear he was teaching a course on empathy at Stanford and made a comment about it's scary that we actually have to have a course to teach empathy, but it's also exciting that we do that. And it made me think, how many companies actually, as part of their onboarding process, take the time to really understand what makes people tick personally and how that fits into the overall organization in a way that they can be offering value as an expansive part of the team instead of always focusing on just fitting in. And I love that part of what we do as a company in Nearsoft is, we follow a fairly long, onboarding or induction process. And a lot of that is focused on helping people understand how we work, right? I came from the traditional business model where, you had the bosses and you had a pretty strict hierarchy and you have to unlearn some of that stuff when you come into this environment because it's more team oriented and there's no one to impress. So it was very refreshing. And I'm wondering how many companies are actually spending time identifying who needs more emotional intelligence training, who needs to learn a little bit more empathy or compassion. And it really made me think about that a lot. And I don't know that's being done. Love to get feedback, by the way, from people listening. Just post your comments on the streams. We're going to track them, and we're going to give you a chance to ask them. What do you guys think about that? You think that's an opportunity for companies to reorient themselves a little bit more a little less on company training, history training, a little more on how to get along together.
Yeah. I mean, it's been growing over time, right? So for a long time, we just train people on the paperwork and the traditional kinds of things. And then we noticed that people didn't know how to give feedback or how to take feedback. And so we had to do training on that. And then we noticed that people didn't know how to ask for things without demanding or insisting or trying to guilt the other person into action and stuff like that. So as we've discovered these things, we've been incorporating them in the orientation, and that's why the orientation went from 2 days to 2 weeks to 6 weeks. I think is what it's at now. And even then, it takes longer than that. I've had a case of somebody talking to me 4 months after they've been on board, asking me, "Who's my boss?" and we had a conversation about that. But I mean, it takes a while to dehabituate from what you know, from what you learn over your whole lifetime, really, starting from home and school and your first job and your second job and your third job, and then learning something new. The thing is, once you start learning the new stuff, it goes very quickly also.
Right. I think
people like the good stuff, yeah.
There's a bit of a balance here, though, I would like to say. I think at Nearsoft, we take our recruiting and who we invite to be part of our team, part of our family, very seriously. So we do try to look for indications, right, of those soft skills, that cultural fit, that empathy, all of these things that Roger was naming, right? This idea of the need for curiosity and support and generosity and collaboration. He mentioned risk-taking, resilience, creativity. On all of those things, I think are important and able to thrive in an environment like ours where it's not going to be so clear, this is your boss, this is what you have to do, get it done. And so I think we are very intentional also in our interviewing, in our selection, in our invitation to see that there is at least some element already within that person's DNA, let's say. Because I think for what we do, right, we're a software development company, I think it's a lot easier to teach a skill. Like, we can teach you how to code, let's say, or teach a new technology, but maybe it's not so easy to teach you what your mom and dad didn't already teach at home, right? So I think there's a balance here that we want to look for it, but if somebody does come into our team and they are struggling with these elements, we are very intentional and to try to help each other keep them and grow them. And we have things, right? Like, feedback is important to our culture. We have our 360 assessments. We even have a feedback class in our orientation. This idea of one-on-one coaching, our wellness program, where we offer psychological support for people who need it when we have those moments of breakdown, right? Our humanness. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even with our English program, we're trying to incorporate elements that's not just, this is the present continuous and this is the present continuous, present perfect continuous. Like, what's the difference? No, we're talking about things like giving feedback and what we're afraid of and all of these things, and opening up this idea of vulnerability, which is another topic that Roger touched on, which I appreciated a lot as well.
Yeah, I found it interesting too. He made a comment about you need to have the support from the top down, and we have our views on that, right? Because we don't operate that way, but we do have a commitment across the company to these initiatives, right? And we've all agreed jointly that that's part of how we do things. Like, people always ask, well, that sounds chaotic, but I'm like, no, autonomy actually comes with a lot of accountability and responsibility, which is self-administered. That's the only way it truly works. And I think a lot of companies are just not prepared for that. It's like, okay, let's give people training on, how to play at work, how to not take themselves serious, how to learn to be more empathic towards one another, how to be more understanding. But then there's all these control structures still in place, which makes people feel not safe. The other thing you mentioned about you have to create a sense of safety. And, I've been in organizations in the past, it's like, yeah, it's safe to talk about it. But then you mention things or you open yourself up and somehow it bites you in the ass later, right? Whereas we don't have that here, right? You can just express yourself openly, and there's truly the freedom to be safe because no one's needing to be impressed. What do you think about that, Matt? I mean, would you think that that's like one of the biggest problems in implementing these kinds of things? Just the structure that's in place in companies?
Well, psychological safety is not only what your boss heard or what you said or something like that to your boss, it's your team as well. And I've noticed that now that we had this peak initiative going on with different teams, I participate with all the teams that have to do with my accounts. And some things work better than others. And the only thing that I've noticed that makes that in some cases work, in some cases not work so well, is that psychological safety is that you're going to say something and you're not going to be ridiculed, or you're not going to be interrogated. Like, why did you say that? In that kind of a thing. Whereas in other teams, you say something and you either get silence or you get this semi-aggressive response, and those teams don't work as well. So it's not just your boss, it's your team, it's your immediate environment that makes a difference. But psychological safety is very interesting. Otherwise, you're not transparent, you're not vulnerable, you're not letting yourself out there, and people have to treat only your facade, whatever you put out there.
Roger mentioned something when he was talking about psychological safety. He was talking about openly discussing mistakes. And to me, I think that was really important. Does anybody here have a mistake that we've openly discussed or like that we want to share?
Well, didn't we used to do that, Carlos? Wasn't that like part of the stand-up or something? I think you mentioned it. Like there was like a pretty strong word used actually. Do you remember? Wasn't there the effed up moment, something like that?
Yeah. Actually, there was. It was called the fuck up nights, right?
So what was that about?
It was something. It's an event that happened in the city where Nearself started, which is Hermosillo, and it's an event. It was not organized by Nearself, but a lot of Nearselfians attended. There's something that I would like to mention in pertaining to what's being discussed right now. This is about psychological safety and what it takes. From my perception, and this is something that Roger also mentioned, from my perception, psychological safety has to do with how you feel when you're around others. In that sense, I think that Roger even mentioned, we even have in DojoLIVE's slogan, motto, which is Tech Without Borders, stories that bring us together. And Roger mentioned, technology can bring us together, but it doesn't tell us how to be together. So there's a big difference between coming together and learning how to be together in order to be together. So there's a lot to explore on how to be together safely, psychologically speaking. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I would, from my standpoint, from Roger's conversation, it would be how do we explore the possibility, how to be together safely, comfortably, and so that everything flows seamlessly. So that would be another thing that I think is worth mentioning and talking about.
So go back to this idea of what was the F up nights. I'm sorry, guys, I can't get myself to say it on air.
Come on, Kim, you can do it. Just say it.
Psychologically unsafe.
Just flow.
It's a safe space, Kim.
It's a safe space.
Yeah.
I'll do it for you.
So what was it about, Carlos?
The R-rated version of DojoLIVE on Mondays.
Well, what was that, Matt?
What were they about?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat what you said? You broke up.
What were they about?
Yeah.
The F up nights.
You mean that group, that particular group? They got together to discuss what had gone wrong. I don't know. I don't have a lot of information about that. I do remember it, but it's been a while since I last heard it, and it had to do with developers and engineers and creative people that got together to discuss what had gone wrong, and just try to get some takeaways out of that. And that's all I know. But I do remember the name because you can't. How can you forget that name?
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, because if we're not able to admit our mistakes, we're not able to get help, right? And we're not able to grow. And more than likely, any mistake that you've gone through, somebody around you has either experienced something similar or gone through it too. They can counsel you and what to do, what not to do. This is what I did. And so I think it's a really cool element that companies need to begin trying to practice. For me personally, I mean, it's not like this is revolutionary because it's got so many millions and millions of hits now, but there's Brene Brown's TED Talk, right, that went crazy popular on vulnerability, which even turned into a show on Netflix. So if you haven't watched those guys, Brene Brown, Vulnerability, I think that should be what do you want to call it? What's the God? I'm having a brain fart right now.
Required.
Right, required. Thank you. Required visibility watching, right, for anybody entering a new job, a new company, wanting to kind of touch on this idea of playfulness, because interestingly, a large part of playfulness is vulnerability, right? He talked about that, and it's true. Like when you think about kids, even playing, right, there's this willingness to take a risk, and when things don't go the way that you want, you have to figure out how to be resilient to that and make it work anyway. You're right. As your kid, you have a choice. Like either I play the way that everybody's kind of playing, or I go home, right? And that happens too. And maybe sometimes going home is the right choice. I don't know. What do we think about that?
You said fart. So.
I'm sorry?
You said the word fart.
I did. Brain fart.
You said the F word.
That's enough.
But it's not fart up nights.
I'm going to challenge you to think about this for a second. And one thing I really enjoyed learning, I was at a World Blue event, which was an award show for, we've been part of that for over a decade. And one of the things that they talked about is hiring people with higher sense of self-worth, because the higher the self-worth, the less likely those people are going to take criticism very personal. The more likely they're going to be open. They're more likely they're going to be vulnerable, because they don't feel like they have to defend themselves too much or make a case for, why they're right. Typical thing that happens a lot with people with huge egos, right? And but it's easy to say it's huge egos, but it's just honestly based on the studies, some of the studies I've done around this, talking about a TED Talk, preparing for a TED Talk. It's actually a lower sense of self-worth, because people with a high sense of self-worth don't feel threatened, right? They just, oh, you have an opinion? That's cool, great. Don't have to agree with you, but I don't have to have an attitude about it either. And I think, not that we test for this implicitly, but I think what I've discovered is a lot of the people we work with, almost 400 people, operate from this state of being, state of mind, because we will challenge each other and say stuff and then don't hold that against the next person like, hey, you did this to me, you said this to me, like, weeks later, like children would, or, so do you think companies should have a program in place to either test or encourage enhancing self-worth? What are some of the ways that could happen? Would that with more playful, taking yourself less serious?
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned in there is hiring people that already have a lot of self-worth. And that is reminiscent of a lot of, at the beginning, a lot of people told us, where are you going to find people that can excel in that environment, right? You have to find these special people marinated in a certain sauce and blah, blah. And the reality is of 300, what are we now? Like 360 something?
Yeah.
Laura, do you know? It's like 350, I don't know, some number. Out of that many people, all I know is 2 that left because they literally said, no, I want somebody to tell me what to do. And 1 that we had to push out because of the same thing. He said, no, I won't do anything unless somebody tells me what to do. And we said, well, not on our nickel. Thank you very much. So the point is that most people, the overwhelming majority of people are the right people. It's just a matter that you have to give them a chance to live in that environment for a while. for a while, they don't believe, like I told you this case of somebody in recruiting that 4 months later was still looking for her boss. And now, of course, it's not, she's totally acclimated and all that, but it took her at least 4 months to get to the point. So, but was she the wrong person? Of course she was the right person. Most everybody are the right person. So, and the other thing you said, Kim, is about the stuff that you didn't learn at home or whatever, or they didn't teach you at home. And the problem is the stuff that they teach you at home a lot of the times.
True.
Shut up, sit down, listen to me, do what I tell you, because I say so. And I know because I've been that kind of parent, okay? It's why should I do this? Because I'm telling you, okay? And really, it takes time to kind of dehabituate from all those things. It doesn't come easily. You got to see other people modeling the behavior, and like you said, Julio, somebody has an opinion. Okay, well, that's interesting. And what do you want to eat? That kind of thing. So yeah, that's part of it as well.
What do you think, Laura? What's it been like for you?